Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Faithwell podcast. This is Pastor Mark Anderson, and I appreciate your joining me here today. Well, what I'd like to look at today is what I'm calling cultural enrichment or cultural erosion, Islam and the limits of multiculturalism. And I want to do this by looking at first a couple of important terms that are commonly used, but I think also commonly misunderstood. And those are multiracial and multicultural. So let's take a look at those and then we'll get on with the main topic here. In public discourse, terms like multiracial and multicultural are often used interchangeably, as if the presence of racial diversity, which America certainly has plenty of, automatically brings about a harmonious blend of cultural richness. But these two ideas are not synonymous. A multiracial society simply refers to a population composed of different ethnic backgrounds, which of course America is. A multicultural society, by contrast, implies something more: the coexistence or even celebration of multiple cultural norms, cultural values and traditions within a single national framework. And here is where the tension sets in. If cultural enrichment is truly taking place, it presupposes a dominant culture, something to be enriched. Without that foundation, the very idea of enrichment becomes incoherent or meaningless. Enriching what exactly? In such a framework, who decides which minority cultures contribute meaningfully to the shared whole and which do not? That judgment is not neutral. It is inevitably shaped by the host society's values. For example, traditions that reinforce hospitality, strong family life, or a love of learning may be welcomed as enriching. Others, such as practices which conflict with liberal democratic principles, may be discouraged or publicly challenged as not being enriching. And yet in recent decades, Western societies have drifted toward the view that all cultures are equally valid. But in practice, of course, this really hardly makes sense. It creates a tremendous paradox. If all cultures are equally valid, then none can serve as a foundation. Not all cultures enrich every other culture. So what follows is not cohesion, but fragmentation, what some people call balkanization. Neighborhoods and school systems, institutions, churches, divide along all kinds of lines. Civic unity weakens, and shared assumptions about law and liberty, what the good life actually means, begin to fray at the edges. And we're seeing this play out today all around us. A healthy pluralistic society can indeed welcome many backgrounds, and America has done that historically. But it did so at a time when there existed a shared civic culture that was strong enough to hold the center. Without that, the multiculturalism that has been a part of American society begins to disintegrate, and that's what we've been seeing. Diversity, to be meaningful, has to have limits: a common story, a shared language, a grand narrative. Now, this is where Islam presents a particularly instructive and often uncomfortable test case. In a multiracial society, Muslims of every ethnic background can and do live as full citizens, often with high levels of integration and contribution. But in a multicultural framework, especially one grounded in relativism, Islam introduces complications that many Western societies have been reluctant to confront. That's because Islam is not merely a private faith or a set of spiritual practices. It's not simply one more denomination sitting on the street corner. It is an all-encompassing way of life with its own legal code, its own moral vision, its own conception of justice and governance, and its own understanding of the relationship between religion and the public sphere. Islam, by its own definition, is in fact religion and state together. It is not content to live in a private corner of a secularized culture. It makes the very large claim that it is the final revelation of God and that all of life must ultimately be ordered under the divine sovereignty as revealed in the Quran. Now, not all Muslims, of course, are going to push this hard to the wall, but enough of them will and do that it becomes a problem in free societies. Islam presents a direct challenge then to the liberal democratic order, which depends on the separation of religion and state, the neutrality of law, and the individual's freedom to believe or disbelieve without consequence. For Islam, such separations are not just forum, they are theological errors, and they are an offense against Allah and the Quran. Law is not the product of human consensus, they would say, but divine revelation. The true community of believers is not just a congregation of folks, once again, gathered on a street corner, but the entire body politic. The ideal Islamic community is an entire society of people under Islam. So the very structure of Islam exists in tension with the pluralistic frameworks of the West. And it's obvious that people in the Western world are having a very hard time facing this, and if they do face it, dealing with it. What that Islamic tension has done, it has sharpened the awareness of the lack of confidence or coherence in the Western world and its capacity to define our own boundaries. If the dominant culture has lost faith in itself, as is increasingly the case in postmodern, post-Christian Europe and North America, it will hesitate to draw hard distinctions. Instead, it defaults to cultural relativism, the view that no culture can be judged superior to another. I mean, why else would the Western world be flooding itself with people from other cultures without any clear sense of how these cultural interactions are going to either enhance or degrade the existing culture? But relativism is not neutral. It is the slow erosion of standards. And when faced with a worldview like Islam, which does know what it believes and says so with clarity, the relativist framework either capitulates or collapses under the weight of its own contradictions. So it's important to recognize, in the end, Islam does not disrupt a confident, coherent society. It reveals whether such a society actually exists. Multiculturalism, when based on relativism rather than civic conviction or a grand narrative, cannot withstand a comprehensive worldview that claims universal jurisdiction over life and law. So what Islam is doing in the Western world today is forcing us to ask a question. Do we believe in anything strongly enough to insist upon it and to draw a line in the sand because of it? Until that question is faced honestly, cultural enrichment will remain a hollow slogan, and diversity, stripped of any unifying grammar, any unifying narrative, will drift toward not harmony, but as we are seeing, toward increasing disunity and fragmentation. So what's the church's role here? Well, as far as I'm concerned, the church must not confuse cultural accommodation with the proclamation of the gospel. Radical inclusion is not the proclamation of the gospel of Christ. But neither should the state abandon its vocation to maintain order for the fear of being called intolerant. That seems to be the worst sin imaginable these days. In this light, Islam challenges not only secular multiculturalism, but it also challenges the church, forcing both to remember who they are. The state must recover its moral clarity and protect the integrity of the civil sphere. The Western world will not survive without a narrative. And that grand narrative that has been the center of the West for centuries is being eroded as we speak. The church, at the same time, must resist the temptation to retreat or conform and instead speak the gospel clearly into the public square for all to hear, not as a tool of political dominance, not to make a Christian society, but as the only word that brings true freedom to all peoples in all society. Ultimately, cultural enrichment is not the church's mission. The proclamation of the gospel is our mission. And that proclamation cannot happen if the church forgets the difference between Caesar and Christ. Well, thanks for joining me today for this this podcast. Please feel free to come back often, and we'll see. You can find out what's up here. You're invited to our new Zoom class, which starts next week. The information is on the website homepage. We're going to be taking a look at the parables of Jesus, and you're welcome to come along. There's other content here too that hopefully you may find to be helpful. So again, thanks to you, grace to you, and I look forward to being with you next time.